Welcome. We've been doing a series of ongoing conversations about what's next in the workplace. And most of those have been around the COVID-19 crisis and looking at how to get back to the workplace and creating a safe environment. I'm fortunate to be here with Rex Miller and Dr. Jeff Jernigan for part 3 of their study about the COVID-19 crisis and the impact that it's had on the workplace, which is all in their book, Return to Work, A Leader's Guide to Avoiding the Mental Health Crisis. This has been a 3-part series. This is part 3 of the series, and welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be with you again.
For session 3, we're talking about how companies can prepare managers for the new demands supporting employee mental health, how to get back to the workplace and reduce the amount of stress. So Jeff, maybe if I can ask you, what are some of those demands that people are experiencing in the workplace?
Let me just describe the 4 most significant influencers of change in this era for the workplace and for the employees. First of all, employees aren't going to be coming back to work like they've been on vacation for 4 months and rested and eager to get back to work. They've been under prolonged stress from a number of different sources during this period of time, and now they're bringing that stress load back to work, which may, for some, be less stressful, and for others, even more stressful, depending on your situation. Families involved, or single people involved, children at home that can't go back to school, insecurity about your future employment. Those things vary from person to person, but the general trend that we're seeing is people are coming back to work with stress that's being added to by the stress of coming back to work. Secondly, we know that the social contracts between employee and employer, and between the general population and the government, has been broken, which is something that needs to be rebuilt in terms of trust. These are the institutions that we consciously and unconsciously depended on for protection, and we were all caught off guard, and some have lost jobs. Money's going to run out fairly soon, and people don't know what they're going to do to pay their mortgage or pay their rent. There's skepticism and distrust that characterizes now, and will for a time, how we respond to government agencies and how we respond to employers. Thirdly, employees are coming back with new expectations about employers. What are you doing now that's different from before, that's going to help protect us in the workplace from the pandemic? Would be an example of an expectation the employee is coming back with. Are we going to work the same way in the same places around the same people with no changes whatsoever? Well, that's not satisfactory. We want to see something different. And there'll be others examples of that moving forward as well. We also will see, as a function of those first 2 reasons, employees not maybe wanting to stay in their current role. Many of them are looking for a transition into an industry that would be more resilient to this kind of thing in the future, a greater degree of safety in terms of that job, in terms of job security, financial security, and health security. And then lastly, ongoing, and we've just begun to see this change happening. There's going to be significant changes in regulatory compliance requirements that will impact how we work and where we work, the nature of the work that we do. The American with Disabilities Act is going to be undergoing change. The OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Act, is going to be undergoing changes. HIPAA, the list goes on of regulations that impact how we work and how the workplace works, are going to continue to require changes on the part of employers and employees well into the future.
It sounds like organizations have a huge responsibility here in terms of, providing the right environment, and, communicating well with people and, setting the direction for how they're going to proceed coming out of this. What kinds of training are going to be required for these organizations in order to bring their people back in a safe and healthy, mentally safe way?
Yeah, so this is really exposing things that have been chronic for a long time. So one chronic area that is now acute is the gap between people who are good managers from the standpoint of knowing how to take care of people and help them develop and grow versus the task management side. It's also exposed what we've known is this rising level of chronic disease and this the higher cost rates of healthcare that has been chronic for a long time. Now it's acute. So really, the new mantra has to be, what's it going to take to create a healthy and happy workplace and build resilience? Those have to be, I think, a couple of the key new tenets. We now know, now that we're away from the rat race, so to speak, the commuting and just all of the stress of the workplace and seeing that there are alternatives, I think a lot of enlightened leaders are starting to think, how can I rebalance work and life better? I think that's going to be a really fascinating conversation. To the management side, that's really a big hill to climb. Managers are not going to become the kind of managers we need, those that can handle the social and emotional needs of employees overnight. That's a long process. We've got some tools we've been using for a long time that help accelerate that process, like the Clifton Strengths or understanding the dynamics of teams. But this is really the linchpin. Either managers will become the fulcrum, the leverage point that will get companies back to a healthy, functioning place, or they'll be the Achilles heel for companies. It resides on the managers. And we see many of them starting to buckle under the weight. They've got the weight of the demands of the company coming down on them. They have to catch back up. And then they've got the needs of their people. They're stuck in the middle with very little support.
I think the big change going back to the workplace for the employers is a new emphasis on managing their own stress, but more interestingly, the responsibility to manage the stress of others and teach them how to manage the stress of others. That's not something historically we've done with wellness programs in the workplace. And it's going to be crucial to getting through this without creating the kinds of mental health and medical conditions that develop out of unmanaged stress. Stress at some point is a disease, and it produces mental health and medical problems, and we don't want to go there in the workplace.
What do you think has permanently changed?
Everything.
It would be easier to list what hasn't changed.
Yeah. Well, I think there needs to be a more integrated leadership approach to combining what human resources has traditionally done, which is manage benefits and risk. The wellness has been kind of a weak add-on that really hasn't been effective. You've got the new needs for managers. You've got the safety side. These need to be brought together. And I don't know if it's going to be a single role. Jeff, you've probably seen more about new roles that might be in the workplace to help integrate this. But we can no longer operate in silos. We have to have a resilient organization, which means there has to be better integration, an ecosystem approach to how organizations are structured. And we're also going to have to really double down on culture. What this really revealed is if you had a healthy and strong culture or a healthy and cohesive culture going in, I'm seeing my clients get stronger. They're rising to the occasion. They're seeing the needs of their people and they're addressing it. Those that did not have a healthy culture going in, I see a lot of chaos and people hiding and people leaving these organizations.
From a leader's perspective, you know, trying to move their organizations in a positive direction and grow their organizations, what kinds of things should they be paying attention to make sure that their people are aligned, you know, and that the culture is healthy and that, you know, they're moving in a positive direction?
Going back to what Rex said about healthy cultures are helping companies lean into this in a positive, constructive way, and they're doing well. Even if a company has a healthy culture, if the nature of their business is impacted sufficiently by the pandemic that the way they do business changes, they can't just assume that the culture that was so successful for them previously is aligned enough with that change in strategy to be healthy still. So one of the things that C-suite leaders and boards are going to have to do is reevaluate their organizational culture and make sure it's aligned with strategy, because if it's not, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker taught us all that. I think they're going to look at some new positions, like Rex mentioned also. At one level, that might be coaching for emotional intelligence, coaching for stress management to individuals, line staff, middle management, executive leadership. In some companies, we're seeing the emergence of what I call a chief recovery officer that sits at the C-suite level. Now, they're not all named that, but that frames what their focus needs to be. They're looking at different divisions of their larger organizations in different parts of the country or around the world, and monitoring how well this transition of the workforce back into the workplace is going, and how well the culture shift in aligning culture with strategies that may have changed is going, because it's going to be different from place to place to place to place. One solution doesn't fit all in this sense. And so somebody needs to keep their finger on the pulse of these transformations that are going on to make sure that they don't get halted, that they're resourced sufficiently to be effective, and that the changes they want to see are actually helping and in a way that doesn't pull the walls down around their ears.
To add to that, leaders have been trained in two basic kinds of problems to solve. Strategic, which is which way do we go and why, and how do we create alignment, or the tactical, how do we execute things. Now, Harvard developed another kind of leadership model called adaptive. That's a lot of the work that Jeff's organization does. This is unknown. How do you lead in an area like Lewis and Clark, trying to navigate to the West Coast, and then they run into the Rocky Mountains? No precedent for that, not equipped for it. How do you lead an organization through that process of an area we don't know? Different instincts, totally, in leadership. And a lot of leaders are going to fail in this area because they're going to try to lead in a strategic way and be firm and set a direction and be clear. This is discovery. This is learn as we go leadership. It's completely different instincts, skills. It's stakeholder management. It's transparency. Just think of those words and how foreign they are to leaders. A lot of leaders we're seeing, I know Jeff's seeing too, they're holding cards close. They don't want to show weakness. They don't want to show that they don't know what they don't know. That, the right brain again, which Jeff has talked about, the herd knows when they're not being told everything. And when you're not transparent during these times and just acknowledge reality, it raises the stress level in the herd, and they don't trust. So again, a new kind of leadership model has to be embraced, learned, developed, And that's the only way to get through what we call the unknown unknowns.
Let me ask you, a lot of our readers are, architects, designers, workplace specialists, facility managers, dealing with the physical environment. And, is there anything that they should be thinking about with regard to the physical environment that can help to support all of these other, practices that we're talking about?
Well, so we talked about in the book, The Healthy Workplace Nudge, another plug for the book, what GoDaddy did in terms of looking at all the touch points in the workplace as either friction points, neutral points, or delightful engagements. And that's from the parking lot to the reception area. Also looking at the healthy areas, the behavioral economics, the nudges. Does it nudge movement? Does it nudge eating healthy? How do we use that to help get people to move, to eat healthy, to drink? I think the biggest change for architects and consultants in this is to shift from thinking that you're the expert coming in to solve problems to you're a guide in the process to help them discover what works for them. Completely different role, completely different set of skills. It's not you're going to come in and do research, go back, come up with a solution, and then present it. What I think architects and designers have is a way of thinking, of solving a problem. Now, how do you bring the people who are going to live with this problem into that discovery together and craft a collective solution?
Well, that's good, Rex. I think, Bob, that they're also going to have to think in terms of multiple solutions as they provide that guidance to people. One solution doesn't fit all. For example, in hospitals, noise abatement is really important, particularly sharp, loud noises or noise associated with pain. Those long hallways and the open doors to the wards, that ramps everybody's stress up. There's other stressors in those kind of workplaces, but that's something architecturally that can be handled. Other workspaces, it's colors and light being let in, and the right colors on the walls, which help reduce stress. In other workplaces, it's going to be spaces for relational connection, break areas, and other areas where people can sit and communicate freely with one another. Architecture is significant to our mental health and to our stress levels, but it's not like there's one cookie cutter box of solutions you can take into every single workplace. Architects are going to have to educate themselves on space, on noise, on vision, on all those practical things that impact how we feel about our work and our workplace and the people in it.
I think there's another piece to this as well, which is an educational side to the equation. You remember when ergonomic chairs were first being introduced to the workplace, we spent a lot of time just teaching people how to use them. I think architects and designers coming in to help repurpose space, but also teach how do we use this space now effectively? What's the effective use of a large conference room now made so that we can use it in the new physically distanced requirements that we have? How do we experience this virtual? That's a design question. How do you experience and make it a less stressful, more engaging, more interactive? That's a design question. So taking design out of just artifact into the experience, I think, is a huge opportunity for architects and designers.
Well, even in my own practice, I've seen a lot of nuance, and I'm seeing a shift in designing spaces more around organizational needs than around specific solutions that people are applying to problems. We're talking about companies and how they can support their people and what they can do to get through this. Are there any other things that companies should be looking at, navigating through this whole crisis?
One of the things that will change is health policies and employee expectations for some changes in their company health insurance plans. What needs to be beefed up in our employee health insurance plans? What needs to be perhaps reduced? What needs to be added that's never been there before, in light of all the things that we've been discussing through this series of 3 conversations? That's going to be a new consideration for employers, particularly where they have tended to shift the rising cost of healthcare into HSAs and other programs like that, that moves the burden more toward the employee. Employees, like we spoke earlier, coming back to the workplace with the expectation that the social contract needs to be strengthened between the employer and the employee, and that's, from their point of view, the employer's responsibility.
With that, I think there's an education side to it as well. Most employees really don't understand their benefits packages, and their employee assistance programs that are in place are really, they're underutilized for the most part, but could be of great assistance to people if they only knew. The International Well Building Institute has enhanced their standards and their framework for designing healthy buildings. I think that's going from a nice to have to a must have, where people are getting the benefit. All the people, 100% of the people are getting the benefit all the time they're in the space, as opposed to just a few of the people getting a benefit from the benefits package.
We've been talking about mental health, and you guys have really done an excellent job of doing a deep dive into what people are experiencing and the emotional health. With regard to organizations, mental health has always been one of those things that's kind of, shoved under the carpet. It's not a topic that people are comfortable talking about on a daily basis. Is there any recommendations that you have for organizations to enable people to feel comfortable, to be more transparent, to have these conversations where they need to be had?
Yeah, that is really a good point, Bob. I think there has always been a stigma associated with mental health issues, which is limited conversations and transparency and vulnerability about those things. And this is a perfect time to get past that to a great degree, because everybody acknowledges we've never been through a situation like this before in our history, and things have to change. And in times like that, there's a whole lot of new things you can drive over the bridge that would not have been tolerated previously. Stigma is one of the things that we should be talking about now, in the context of what it is, and how do we minimize it? How do we eliminate it in our conversations with people about the workplace and mental health issues in the workplace? Two of the things that we are working with our executive clients on in helping them deal with this issue of stigma is what we call receiver-oriented communication, which takes a certain degree of empathy, the ability to step in someone else's shoes, a certain degree of transparency and vulnerability as a communication skill that's needed. The real purpose behind that is to create an environment where appropriate transparency and vulnerability is not penalized, and that stigma can be removed. But we don't want to call it stigma training. We call it receiver-oriented communication training, to take the stigma out of it. Then secondly, we help people understand that they need to set enough time aside in their schedules for unhurried conversations, because so much of what we're talking about requires empathy, requires allowing people to communicate not just intellectually what their concerns are, but emotionally what their concerns are also. And that latter part is a major contributor to de-stressing relationships, de-stressing the workplace. And so open up your schedule. If somebody suddenly needs to talk to you and they say it's urgent, don't have in your mind, I'm going to give them 3 minutes and then that's it. Be prepared to have a lot of unhurried conversations. When you do that, what people experience is a new level of understanding and acceptance of their situation on your part. And that also minimizes and releases stigma.
Good. I think too, with that, language matters. You know, we've been
Mm.
promoting very early on change social distancing to physical distancing. Maybe a better word is brain health versus mental health,
Yeah.
because when we talk about mental health, what we're talking is taking a deficit and minimizing a deficit. If we talk about brain health, it gets back to what Jeff was talking about in the previous. What do we need to do to make this a healthy, optimized brain and a healthy, optimized body? Um, I think that helps us as well. If leaders model this, that helps also to overcome the stigma, but also gives permission to people. I've consulted with companies that want to bring better health and well-being to their workplace, and their population wasn't adopting it. But when I looked at the leaders and asked them, how many hours do you work a week? What kind of sleep do you get? Uh, they're not modeling it. So employees are only going to go as far as they see the leaders taking it and giving permission to go there. There's huge opportunity to reset. I agree with Jeff. This is an opportunity to reset our norms and expectations, to look at the day and redesign the day instead of back to back to back, meeting, recovery, meeting, recovery. And that doesn't mean go to social media. That means meeting, recovery, meeting, nap time. Jeff and I were talking about, we both are taking advantage of the power nap during this time. Um, Opportunities are all around. We have an opportunity to rethink the habits and the patterns that we just took for granted, that this pandemic has totally thrown out the window. And the hope is we don't go back to the way it was, that we think freshly and adopt some new patterns and habits that for the long term are more resilient and produce better outcomes.
Let me ask each of you, coming out of this, what's your biggest hope? When you look into the future, what do you guys see and what's your greatest hope coming out of this?
Well, that falls into a couple of categories for me, Bob. One is that all of us, personally and professionally, regardless of what the work is we do, are more conscious of our value driven behaviors. All of us have, in varying degrees, a common set of values that impact our lives. A value is a belief that a certain mode of conduct or outcome is more preferable over others. And though we may have lots of values that change in our circumstances over time, 32 of those we have are common to every human being on the face of this earth. And 6 to 8 of those are responsible for 90% of our behavior. That's why I like the Clifton Strengths Finder, because there's actually a value-driven assessment. That's true about corporations also. Out of all the values that drive corporate behavior, and we know what those are, 6 to 8 of them are going to be 90% of corporations' behavior. And if we could become more conscious of what values drive us, and what values we would like to drive our workplace, we're going to be healthier for it. On more of an individual level, I would like to see people become more in touch with their physical and emotional self. I know as a baby boomer, I was driven for many years by the idea that success comes if you work with integrity and you work very hard and you have a strong work ethic. And by golly, that's what I'm going to do because I'm going to conquer the world. Typical boomer perspective. Well, no, I think the perspective I'd like to have and like to see other people have in their personhood is I need others and I'm designed to need others. And collaboration is where the greatest joy, fulfillment, and accomplishment is going to occur. And if anything needs to be conquered, the world or something smaller, it's because a number of us agree that needs to happen and come together and work towards that together.
This has been a great conversation, and I'm really thrilled to have both of you and hear about your ideas and your concepts. This conversation, I think, hopefully has helped to shed some light onto how people can better navigate this and reduce the stress, and get us back to a healthy work environment, although it's going to be a little bit different. Thank you to both of you. This has been a lot of fun.
You're welcome. Thank you,
And
Bob.
it's fun for us. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Rex.
Yep. Thank you,
See
Jeff.
you all
Take care.
soon.